A glamorous bride in Dubai was found dead on her wedding night after her wealthy husband discovered her devastating secret past. But 3 years later, when police reopen the case, what they find in her personal diary changes everything and exposes a truth that would shake the entire investigation. The phone call came at 4:37 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. The voice on the other end was shaking, barely audible above the chaos of sirens and shouting in the background. Hotel security at the Burj Al Arab had discovered something that would send shockwaves through Dubai's elite social circle and beyond. In the presidential suite on the 25th floor, where champagne glasses still held bubbles from the previous evening's celebration, a young woman lay motionless on the marble floor. Her wedding dress, a custom-made creation worth more than most people's annual salary, was torn and stained. The room that had been prepared for the perfect honeymoon had become a crime scene. Layla Qasim, just 29 years old and married for less than 12 hours, was dead. The discovery sent the luxury hotel into lockdown mode. Staff members who had served the couple dinner just hours before were now being questioned by police. The same corridors where wedding guests had laughed and celebrated were now filled with forensic investigators and crime scene tape. But this was not just any ordinary tragedy. This was the murder of a woman who had everything to live for, killed by the man who had promised to love and protect her forever. The groom, Rashid Al Fahad, was found in the bathroom, catatonic and covered in blood. When police arrived, he kept repeating the same words over and over. "I had to know the truth. I had to know who she really was." The opulent suite told a story of violence and betrayal. Expensive wedding gifts were scattered across the floor. A laptop computer had been smashed against the wall, its screen shattered into 1,000 pieces. In the bedroom, investigators found torn photographs and burned documents in the fireplace. Whatever Rashid had discovered about his new wife had driven him to a rage so intense that it cost Layla her life. The contrast was devastating. Just hours earlier, this same couple had been dancing to their favorite song while 300 of Dubai's most influential people watched and celebrated. The wedding had been featured in luxury magazines and social media accounts around the world. Now, instead of beginning their new life together, one of them was dead and the other was in police custody. Dubai's police force had seen many cases involving the wealthy and powerful, but this one was different. The brutality of the crime, combined with the high-profile nature of the couple, made it front-page news across the Middle East and beyond. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What could Layla have hidden that was so terrible it drove her husband to murder? The investigation began immediately, but even experienced detectives were shocked by what they found. This was not a case of domestic violence or a crime of passion in the traditional sense. This was something far more complex, involving deception, international crime, and a web of lies that stretched back years. As dawn broke over Dubai's skyline, casting long shadows across the city's gleaming towers, investigators knew they were dealing with something unprecedented. The perfect wedding had become the perfect murder, and the secrets that would emerge would shock everyone who thought they knew Layla Qasim. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in that luxury suite, we must first understand the two people at the center of this case. Layla Qasim and Rashid Al Fahad appeared to be the perfect couple, but appearances can be deceiving, especially in a city built on dreams and ambition. Layla had arrived in Dubai 3 years before her death, claiming to be a freelance interior designer from Lebanon. She was strikingly beautiful, with dark hair and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her portfolio was impressive, filled with high-end residential projects and commercial spaces that showcased her impeccable taste. Within months of arriving, she had established herself as one of the most sought-after designers in the city. Her social media presence was carefully curated, showing a lifestyle that many envied. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, and exotic vacations filled her Instagram feed. She attended charity galas, art exhibitions, and private parties thrown by Dubai's elite. To everyone who knew her, Layla was living the dream. But those closest to her noticed something different about her past. She rarely spoke about her family in Lebanon, claiming they had died in a car accident when she was young. She had no childhood friends who visited, no relatives who called on holidays. Her life seemed to have begun the day she stepped off the plane in Dubai. Rashid Al Fahad, on the other hand, was Dubai royalty. His family had made their fortune in real estate development, building some of the city's most iconic structures. At 35, he was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in the Emirates. He had been educated at the finest schools in Europe and spoke 4 languages fluently. Rashid was known for his generosity and his commitment to philanthropic causes. He had funded schools in rural areas, supported environmental initiatives, and contributed millions to various charities. His reputation was spotless, and his business dealings were always conducted with the highest level of integrity. The couple met at a charity auction in November, 2 years before their wedding. Layla had been commissioned to design the event space, and Rashid was the evening's largest donor. Witnesses described their first meeting as electric. They spent the entire evening talking, seemingly oblivious to the hundreds of other guests around them. Their courtship was the stuff of fairy tales. Rashid would send flowers to her office every morning, not just any flowers, but rare orchids flown in from Thailand. He would surprise her with weekend trips to Paris, private dinners on his yacht, and jewelry that cost more than most people's homes. Layla, for her part, brought culture and sophistication to his life that he had never experienced before. Their engagement was announced in the society pages of every major publication in the region. The ring, a 15-carat pink diamond, was photographed and shared thousands of times on social media. Their engagement party was held at the Atlantis Resort, with over 500 guests and entertainment that included international performers and a private fireworks display. But even during their engagement, there were small signs that something was not quite right. Layla would sometimes receive phone calls that would make her anxious and withdrawn. She would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming she was meeting with clients or handling family business. Her assistant at the design firm mentioned that she would sometimes come to work looking like she had not slept. Rashid's family, while publicly supportive of the relationship, had privately expressed concerns. His mother, Fatima al-Fahad, had hired a private investigator to look into Layla's background. The investigation turned up very little concrete information about her life before Dubai, which only increased their suspicions. The wedding planning itself became a source of tension. Layla insisted on handling all the arrangements personally, refusing help from wedding planners or family members. She was particular about the guest list, excluding certain people without explanation. When Rashid asked about inviting her family from Lebanon, she became emotional and asked him never to bring up the subject again. Their friends noticed changes in both of them as the wedding approached. Rashid, normally confident and outgoing, seemed increasingly worried and distracted. He would ask mutual friends casual questions about Layla's past, trying to gather information without seeming suspicious. Layla, meanwhile, became more secretive and paranoid, checking her phone constantly and looking over her shoulder in public. The night before the wedding, Layla's best friend in Dubai, Nadia Hakim, would later tell police that she had called her crying. Layla had said she was scared and that she had made terrible mistakes in her past. When Nadia pressed for details, Layla hung up the phone. It was the last time they would speak. Despite these warning signs, the wedding proceeded as planned. Both families were heavily invested in the celebration, both financially and emotionally. The couple themselves seemed to push through their doubts, perhaps hoping that marriage would solve whatever problems they were facing. The wedding preparations revealed just how different their worlds were. Rashid's family had lived in Dubai for generations, with deep roots in the community and business relationships that went back decades. Layla's world was much smaller and more isolated, consisting mainly of clients and casual acquaintances rather than deep friendships or family connections. As the wedding day approached, the pressure mounted. This was not just a marriage between two people, but a union between families, businesses, and social circles. The expectations were enormous, and the spotlight was intense. Neither Layla nor Rashid seemed prepared for what was about to unfold. The investigation into Layla's true identity began the moment police arrived at the crime scene. What they discovered would shake the foundations of everything people thought they knew about the murdered bride. Layla Qasim was not her real name. The woman who had charmed Dubai's elite and captured the heart of one of the city's most prominent men was actually Zara Nakad, a former associate of one of Europe's most dangerous criminal organizations. Her real life had begun in the industrial outskirts of Marseille, France, where she had grown up in poverty with a mother who struggled with drug addiction. By the age of 16, Zara had fallen in with a group of criminals who specialized in high-end theft and money laundering. Her beauty and intelligence made her the perfect person to infiltrate wealthy social circles and gather information for elaborate heists. For 5 years, Zara had worked as what law enforcement called a honey trap. She would seduce wealthy men, gain access to their homes and businesses, and then provide detailed information to her criminal associates. The group would then rob these homes when the families were away, making off with millions in cash, jewelry, and artwork. The operation was sophisticated and highly profitable. Zara would spend months building relationships with her targets, learning their schedules, security systems, and most valuable possessions. She was never directly involved in the actual thefts, making her virtually impossible to prosecute, even when her associates were caught. Her downfall came when she was assigned to target Vincent Moreau, a prominent French businessman and art collector. Moreau was different from her previous targets. He was intelligent, suspicious, and had connections to law enforcement. When he began to suspect that Zara was not who she claimed to be, he set a trap. Moreau fed Zara false information about a valuable painting he claimed to keep in his home safe. When his house was robbed 2 weeks later, and the thieves went straight to the safe looking for the non-existent painting, he knew he had found his leak. He contacted police, but by the time they moved to arrest her, Zara had disappeared. The criminal organization she had worked for was not forgiving of failure. They had lost millions because of her mistakes, and they wanted revenge. Zara knew that her life was in danger, and she made the decision to disappear completely. Using connections she had made during her criminal career, Zara obtained a false passport and new identity documents. She chose the name Layla Qassem, created a backstory as a Lebanese interior designer, and decided to start over in Dubai, a city where many people reinvented themselves and few asked too many questions about the past. The transformation from Zara to Layla was remarkable. She used her knowledge of luxury goods and high-end living, gained during her years of criminal activity, to create a legitimate career as an interior designer. Her understanding of wealth and power, learned while deceiving some of Europe's richest men, helped her navigate Dubai's social scene with ease. But her criminal past was never far behind. Even in Dubai, she received occasional messages from her former associates, reminding her that they had not forgotten her betrayal. She lived in constant fear that someone would recognize her, or that her past would catch up with her new life. The stress of maintaining her false identity took its toll. Layla began taking prescription medication to help with anxiety and insomnia. She would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was watching her apartment. She installed multiple security systems and changed her phone number regularly. Her relationship with Rashid represented both her greatest triumph and her greatest risk. Marrying into one of Dubai's most prominent families would give her the protection and legitimacy she craved, but it also meant more scrutiny and more chances for her true identity to be discovered. As the wedding approached, the pressure became unbearable. Layla knew that Rashid's family was investigating her background, and she was terrified of what they might find. She also knew that her criminal associates in Europe were still looking for her, and a high-profile wedding would only make her more visible. 3 weeks before the wedding, Layla received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Marcus Dubois, the leader of the criminal organization she had betrayed. He had found her. Dubois did not threaten her directly. Instead, he congratulated her on her upcoming wedding and mentioned how much he was looking forward to reading about it in the newspapers. The message was clear. He knew where she was, and he was watching. Layla's world began to collapse. She could not tell Rashid the truth without destroying their relationship and putting him in danger. She could not run away without abandoning the life she had built and the man she had come to love. She was trapped between her criminal past and her hopeful future. In the days leading up to the wedding, Layla made a series of desperate decisions. She withdrew large amounts of cash from her accounts, telling her bank she was making wedding purchases. She updated her will, leaving everything to a children's charity in Lebanon. She also wrote a long letter explaining her true identity and the circumstances that had led her to Dubai. The letter was found by police 3 years later, hidden in a safety deposit box that Layla had rented under another false name. In it, she expressed her love for Rashid and her regret for the deception. She also warned that dangerous people from her past might come looking for her and that anyone close to her could be at risk. The night before the wedding, Layla made one final desperate attempt to escape her situation. She called her former handler from the criminal organization, hoping to negotiate some kind of arrangement. The conversation did not go well. She was told that her debt could only be paid in blood, either hers or that of people she cared about. Faced with impossible choices, Layla decided to go through with the wedding, hoping that somehow everything would work out. She did not know that Rashid had already begun to suspect the truth about her identity, or that the confrontation that would end her life was just hours away. The morning of March 15th dawned clear and warm in Dubai, with the kind of perfect weather that made the city famous around the world. The Burj Al Arab Hotel buzzed with activity, as staff prepared for what was being called the wedding of the decade. Every detail had been planned to perfection, from the custom floral arrangements to the private orchestra that would play during the ceremony. Layla woke up in her bridal suite at 6 in the morning, despite having gone to bed just 3 hours earlier. She had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what the day might bring. The prescription medication she had been taking for anxiety was no longer helping, and she felt like she was walking toward her own execution. Her wedding dress hung in the corner of the room like a beautiful ghost. The designer gown, made from silk imported from Italy and covered with thousands of hand-sewn pearls, had taken 6 months to complete. Looking at it now, Layla felt only dread. She knew this might be the last day of her life, either because Rashid would discover her true identity or because her criminal past would finally catch up with her. At 7:30, Layla's phone rang. The number was blocked, but she knew who it was. Marcus Dubois' voice was calm and friendly, as if he were calling to wish her well on her wedding day. "Zara, my dear," he said, using her real name like a weapon. "What a beautiful day for a wedding. I hope you are ready for all the attention you are about to receive. The whole world will be watching." Layla's hands shook as she held the phone. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Nothing at all," Dubois replied. "I just wanted to remind you that we never forget our friends. Enjoy your special day." The line went dead, leaving Layla more terrified than ever. She knew the call was a warning. Her criminal associates were close, and they were planning something for her wedding day. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Rashid was having his own crisis. His private investigator had called him at dawn with disturbing news. The man had finally found concrete evidence that Layla was not who she claimed to be. Documents had been discovered showing that Layla Kassem's identity had been created just 3 years ago, around the time she had arrived in Dubai. The investigator explained that whoever Layla really was, she had gone to great lengths to hide her true identity. Professional forgers had been involved, and significant money had been spent to create her new persona. This was not a simple case of someone changing their name. This was a complete identity replacement. Rashid sat in his room, staring at the evidence in front of him. His wedding was scheduled to begin in 8 hours, and he had just learned that his bride was living under a false identity. He did not know who she really was, where she had come from, or what she might be running from. The rational part of his mind told him to call off the wedding. 300 guests had already arrived from around the world. The media was gathered outside, and his family's reputation was on the line. But more importantly, he realized he did not really know the woman he was about to marry. The emotional part of his mind, however, was not ready to give up. He loved Layla, regardless of what her real name might be. He decided to confront her privately before the ceremony and give her a chance to explain. If she could provide a reasonable explanation for her deception, he would consider proceeding with the wedding. As the morning progressed, both bride and groom went through the motions of wedding preparation while dealing with their private crises. Layla's hair and makeup team arrived at 9, followed by the photographer and videographer who would document the day. She smiled and laughed at appropriate moments, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Rashid's family began arriving at the hotel for the traditional pre-wedding gatherings. His mother, Fatima, noticed immediately that something was wrong with her son. She had known him for 35 years, and she could see the stress in his face despite his attempts to hide it. "Rashid," she said quietly when they had a moment alone, "you look like you have seen a ghost. What is troubling you?" Rashid wanted to tell her everything, but he knew that involving his family would only make the situation more complicated. "I am just nervous," he said. "It is a big day." Fatima was not convinced, but she respected her son's privacy. She had her own concerns about Layla, but she had decided to trust Rashid's judgment. Now seeing his obvious distress, she wondered if she should have been more vocal about her suspicions. The afternoon brought the first of several disturbing incidents that would mar the wedding day. During the traditional henna ceremony, one of the hotel's security guards approached Layla with a message. A man had been asking about her at the front desk, claiming to be an old friend who wanted to surprise her. The man had not given his name, but the description matched Marcus Dubois perfectly. Layla excused herself from the ceremony and went to her room, where she called hotel security and asked them to increase protection around the wedding venues. She claimed she was worried about overzealous photographers, but the security chief could tell she was genuinely frightened. At 4 in the afternoon, just 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Rashid made his decision. He would confront Layla about her false identity, but he would do it after the wedding. He could not bear the thought of humiliating her in front of their guests and families. He would marry her as planned, and then they would have a private conversation during which she could explain everything. The wedding ceremony itself was everything that had been planned and more. The ballroom of the Burj Al Arab had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow reflections across the walls. The 300 guests included business leaders, government officials, and celebrities from around the world. Layla walked down the aisle in her stunning gown, accompanied by a string quartet, playing a piece she had composed especially for the occasion. To the guests, she looked like the perfect bride, radiant, elegant, and deeply in love. Only those who knew her well could see the fear in her eyes. Rashid stood at the altar in his traditional wedding attire, watching his bride approach. Despite everything he had learned that morning, he felt his heart skip a beat when he saw her. Whatever her real name was, whatever she was hiding, he loved her. The ceremony proceeded without incident, though several guests later mentioned that both the bride and groom seemed unusually tense. When they exchanged vows, Layla's voice was barely audible, and Rashid's hands were visibly shaking. The reception that followed was a celebration worthy of royalty. The hotel's executive chef had prepared a feast that included delicacies from around the world. The entertainment included traditional dancers, a famous singer who had flown in from London, and a fireworks display that could be seen from space. But even during the celebration, the tension continued to build. Layla kept checking her phone, and she jumped every time someone approached her from behind. Rashid noticed her behavior and became increasingly worried about what was causing her obvious fear. At 9:30, during the dinner portion of the reception, Layla received a text message that made her blood run cold. It was a photo of her and Rashid dancing, taken just moments earlier from somewhere inside the ballroom. The message that accompanied it was simple: "Beautiful wedding, see you soon." Layla excused herself from the reception and ran to the bathroom, where she vomited from sheer terror. Her criminal associates were not just watching her, they were inside the wedding venue, close enough to photograph her without being detected. When she returned to the reception, she pulled Rashid aside and told him she was feeling ill. She suggested they retire to their suite early, skipping the traditional last dance and final toasts. Rashid was concerned about her health, but he was also secretly relieved. He was eager to have the private conversation they needed to have about her identity. As they left the reception, neither of them knew that they were walking toward a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The perfect wedding was about to become a perfect nightmare, and the secrets that had been hidden for so long were about to be exposed in the most violent way possible. The presidential suite of the Burj Al Arab had been prepared for the perfect honeymoon. Rose petals covered the bed, candles flickered throughout the room, and champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside the window overlooking Dubai's glittering skyline. It should have been the beginning of a beautiful life together. Instead, it became the scene of a devastating tragedy. Layla and Rashid entered their suite at 10:45, both exhausted from the long day and the emotional strain they had been carrying. For a few minutes, they tried to maintain the pretense that everything was normal. They opened the champagne, toasted their new marriage, and attempted to make small talk about the wedding ceremony. But the tension was too great to ignore. Rashid could not stop thinking about the evidence his investigator had provided, and Layla could not stop thinking about the threatening messages she had received. They were like two actors who had forgotten their lines, going through the motions of a scene they no longer believed in. At 11:15, Rashid made the decision to confront his new wife about her true identity. He had planned to approach the subject gently, but his nervousness made him sound more accusatory than he intended. "Layla," he said, "we need to talk about something important. I have learned some things about your past that concern me." The color drained from Layla's face. She had been dreading this moment for months, but she was still not prepared for it. "What kind of things?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rashid pulled out the folder his investigator had given him. Inside were copies of documents showing that Layla Kassem's identity had been created 3 years ago, along with evidence that her claimed background in Lebanon was fabricated. "I know you are not who you say you are," Rashid said. "I know that Layla Kassem is not your real name, and I know that you have been lying to me about your past. What I do not know is why." Layla stared at the documents, her mind racing. She had 3 choices. She could continue lying and hope to convince Rashid that the documents were fake. She could tell him part of the truth while hiding the most dangerous details, or she could confess everything and hope he would forgive her. "Rashid," she said finally, "you are right. Layla is not my real name, but I can explain everything." For the next hour, Layla told her husband a version of the truth. She admitted that her name was really Zara Narkad and that she had come to Dubai to escape a dangerous situation in Europe. She told him about growing up in poverty and making bad choices as a young woman. She explained that she had been involved with criminals, but she portrayed herself as a victim who had been forced into illegal activities. What she did not tell him was the full extent of her criminal career. She did not mention that she had been a professional con artist who had deliberately seduced wealthy men in order to rob them. She did not tell him about the millions of dollars in stolen goods or the lives that had been destroyed by her actions. Rashid listened to her partial confession with a mixture of relief and horror. He was glad that she was finally being honest with him, but he was shocked by the reality of her past. The woman he had married was not the person he thought he knew. "Why did you not tell me this before?" he asked. "Why did you wait until after our wedding to be honest with me?" Layla broke down crying. "I was afraid you would not love me if you knew the truth," she said. "I was afraid you would leave me, and I could not bear the thought of losing you." Rashid held her while she cried, but his mind was spinning. He realized that their entire relationship had been built on lies. Every conversation they had shared, every moment of intimacy, every plan they had made for the future had been based on a false identity. At 12:30 in the morning, just as it seemed like they might be able to work through their problems, Layla's phone rang. The call was from Marcus Dubois, and this time he was not calling to make threats. He was calling to collect a debt. "Zara," he said when she answered, "I hope you enjoyed your wedding. Now it is time to get back to work." "I am not Zara anymore," Layla said, her voice shaking. "That life is over. I am married now, and I am never going back." Dubois laughed. "You think marriage will protect you from your obligations? You still owe us 5 million euros plus interest. That debt does not disappear just because you found yourself a rich husband." Rashid could hear the conversation, even though he could not understand what was being said. He could see the terror in his wife's eyes, and he knew that whatever she had told him was not the complete truth. "I do not have that kind of money," Layla said. "But your husband does," Dubois replied. "And if you cannot pay, then he will pay for you, one way or another." The call ended, leaving Layla in a state of complete panic. She knew that Dubois was not making empty threats. Her criminal associates were capable of extreme violence, and they would not hesitate to hurt Rashid if she did not pay what they claimed she owed. "Who was that?" Rashid demanded. "What did they want?" Layla realized that she could no longer hide the truth. Her partial confession had not been enough, and now Rashid's life was in danger because of her past. She had to tell him everything, no matter what the consequences. For the next 2 hours, from 1 in the morning until 3, Layla told her husband the complete truth about her criminal career. She explained how she had been a professional con artist, how she had seduced wealthy men in order to rob them, and how she had stolen millions of dollars over the course of 5 years. She told him about Vincent Moreau, the French businessman whose trap had led to her downfall. She explained how she had been forced to flee Europe when her criminal associates turned against her. She described the constant fear she had lived with since arriving in Dubai, always looking over her shoulder and wondering when her past would catch up with her. Most importantly, she told him about the 5 million euros that Dubois claimed she owed, money that represented her share of profits from crimes she had helped commit. She explained that her former associates would never forgive the debt, and that they would kill both her and Rashid if they could not collect. Rashid listened to this confession in stunned silence. The woman he had married was not just someone with a complicated past. She was a career criminal who had deceived him from the moment they met. Everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. "So our entire relationship was fake?" he asked when she finished. "You never loved me at all?" "No," Layla said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. Everything else was a lie, but my love for you is the only true thing in my life." Rashid stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. He felt like his world had collapsed around him. The woman he had married was a stranger, and now his own life was in danger because of her criminal past. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Pay them 5 million euros and hope they leave us alone?" "I do not know," Layla said. "I have been trying to figure out a solution for months, but there is no good answer. If we pay them, they will just demand more money. If we do not pay them, they will kill us both." It was at this moment that Rashid made the decision that would change everything. He could not live with the deception, and he could not live in fear of criminals who might attack them at any time. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and terrified. "I cannot do this," he said. "I cannot live with someone who has lied to me about everything. I cannot build a life with someone whose past puts both of us in constant danger." Layla begged him to reconsider, but Rashid had made up his mind. He told her that he wanted a divorce, and that she would have to face her criminal past without his help. He said he would give her money to disappear again, but he could not remain married to someone he did not trust. The argument that followed was intense and emotional. Layla pleaded with Rashid to give her another chance, while he insisted that their marriage was over before it had really begun. Both of them were exhausted, frightened, and angry. At 4 in the morning, their argument reached a breaking point. Layla, desperate to save her marriage, made a decision that would prove fatal. She told Rashid that she would rather die than live without him, and she threatened to take her own life if he divorced her. Rashid, thinking she was being manipulative, told her to stop making dramatic threats. He said that if she really wanted to die, she should stop involving him in her problems. What happened next remains unclear, as the only witness was Rashid himself. According to his statement to police, Layla became increasingly agitated and began threatening to hurt herself. She went to the bathroom and returned with a razor blade, which she held to her wrist. Rashid said he tried to take the blade away from her, and a struggle ensued. During the struggle, Layla was fatally injured. Rashid claimed it was an accident, that he had been trying to save her life, not end it. But the physical evidence told a different story. The amount of blood at the scene, the nature of Layla's injuries, and the condition of the hotel room all suggested that whatever had happened was more violent than Rashid had admitted. When hotel security discovered the scene at 4:37 in the morning, they found Rashid sitting on the floor beside his wife's body, covered in blood and in a state of shock. He kept repeating that he had tried to save her, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The perfect wedding had ended in the worst possible way. The bride was dead, the groom was in police custody, and the truth about what had really happened in that hotel suite would remain a mystery for years to come. The investigation into Layla's death began immediately after the discovery of her body. Dubai police treated the case as a potential homicide from the start, despite Rashid's claims that his wife's death had been accidental. The evidence at the scene was extensive and contradictory, painting a picture of violence that was difficult to reconcile with Rashid's version of events. Detective Amira Hassan was assigned to lead the investigation. A 20-year veteran of the Dubai police force, Hassan had worked on hundreds of cases involving domestic violence and had developed a reputation for her thorough and methodical approach to crime scene analysis. She knew immediately that this case would be different from anything she had handled before. The presidential suite had been destroyed during whatever had taken place between the newlyweds. Furniture was overturned. Expensive artwork had been damaged, and there was blood on the walls and floor. The forensic team documented everything carefully, but even experienced investigators were shocked by the level of violence they encountered. The autopsy results were equally disturbing. Layla had suffered multiple injuries, including defensive wounds on her hands and arms that suggested she had tried to fight back against her attacker. The fatal wound was a deep cut to her neck, but there were also signs of blunt force trauma to her head and torso. Dr. Khalil Rashwan, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, told Detective Hassan that the injuries were consistent with a violent struggle, but not with Rashid's claim that he had been trying to save his wife from self-harm. The pattern of wounds suggested that someone had attacked Layla with significant force and sustained violence. This was not an accident, Dr. Rashwan told Hassan. This was a deliberate and brutal assault. The victim fought for her life, but her attacker was stronger and more determined. Meanwhile, the media attention surrounding the case was intense and unrelenting. The wedding had been covered by society magazines and social media influencers, making Layla and Rashid celebrities in their own right. When news of the murder broke, it became international news within hours. The contrast between the fairy tale wedding and the brutal murder captured the public imagination. Photos of the couple dancing just hours before Layla's death were juxtaposed with images of the crime scene and Rashid's arrest. The story had everything that made for compelling news: wealth, beauty, secrets, and violence. Social media exploded with theories about what had happened. Some people defended Rashid, arguing that he was a respected businessman who would never hurt his wife. Others pointed to the evidence of domestic violence and demanded justice for Layla. The hashtag Justice for Layla began trending worldwide within 24 hours of her death. The investigation into Layla's true identity added another layer of complexity to the case. When Detective Hassan began looking into the victim's background, she discovered the same things that Rashid's private investigator had found. Layla Qassem's identity had been created 3 years earlier, and her claimed background in Lebanon was fabricated. Working with international law enforcement agencies, Hassan was able to piece together Layla's real identity as Zara Nuqad and her criminal past in Europe. The discovery that the victim had been a professional con artist and thief changed the entire dynamic of the case. Suddenly, the investigation had to consider the possibility that Layla's murder was connected to her criminal past rather than domestic violence. The threatening phone calls she had received, the mysterious man who had been asking about her at the hotel, and the €5 million debt all pointed to the involvement of organized crime. Detective Hassan contacted Interpol and began working with French authorities to learn more about the criminal organization that Zara had been associated with. What she learned was disturbing. Marcus Dubois and his associates were suspected of involvement in dozens of violent crimes, including several murders of people who had crossed them. The investigation took another turn when Hassan's team discovered that Layla had rented a safety deposit box under yet another false name. Inside the box they found cash, fake identity documents, and a detailed confession letter that she had written just days before her wedding. The letter provided crucial information about Layla's criminal career and her reasons for fleeing to Dubai. It also contained warnings about the danger posed by her former associates and her fears that they would eventually find her. Most importantly, it expressed her genuine love for Rashid and her regret for deceiving him. "I know that I have lived a life of lies," she had written, "but my love for Rashid is the only true thing I have ever felt. I pray that he will forgive me for the deception, and I hope that we can build a real life together based on honesty and trust." The letter contradicted the prosecution's theory that Layla had been trying to deceive Rashid for financial gain. Instead, it suggested that she had genuinely wanted to leave her criminal past behind and start over with the man she loved. As the investigation continued, more evidence emerged that supported the theory of organized crime involvement. Hotel security cameras showed several suspicious individuals in the lobby and public areas during the wedding celebration. One of these individuals was later identified as a known associate of Marcus Dubois. Phone records showed that Layla had received multiple calls from untraceable numbers in the days leading up to her death. The timing of these calls corresponded with her increasingly anxious behavior, as reported by friends and hotel staff. The investigation also revealed that Layla had been making preparations for the possibility that she might need to flee again. She had withdrawn large amounts of cash from her accounts, updated her will, and made arrangements for her design business to be transferred to her assistant. Despite this evidence, the prosecution decided to proceed with charges against Rashid. The physical evidence at the crime scene was compelling, and Rashid's own admissions about struggling with his wife over a razor blade placed him at the scene during the time of her death. Rashid was charged with second-degree murder and released on bail pending trial. The amount of bail, 10 million dirhams, was one of the highest ever set in Dubai, reflecting both the severity of the charges and the international attention the case had received. The trial was scheduled to begin 6 months after Layla's death, but it would be delayed multiple times as both the prosecution and defense gathered additional evidence. The case had become so complex, involving international criminal organizations and multiple false identities, that it required cooperation from law enforcement agencies around the world. Meanwhile, the media coverage continued to intensify. Documentary filmmakers began working on projects about the case. Investigative journalists dug deeper into both Layla's criminal past and Rashid's business dealings, and social media influencers offered their own theories about what had really happened. The Al Fahad family, devastated by the scandal, hired a team of the best defense attorneys in the region. They were determined to prove Rashid's innocence and restore their family's reputation. The legal fees alone were estimated to exceed $5 million. As the first anniversary of Layla's death approached, the case remained unsolved in the minds of many observers. The evidence was contradictory, the motives were unclear, and the truth seemed to be buried under layers of deception and violence. But Detective Hassan was not ready to give up. She knew that somewhere in the evidence she had collected, there was a clue that would explain what had really happened in that hotel suite. She just had to find it. 3 years after Layla's death, the case that had captivated the world seemed to be reaching its conclusion. Rashid had been convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. His appeals had been exhausted, and he was serving his time in a high-security facility outside Dubai. The media had moved on to other stories, and the public had largely forgotten about the bride who had died on her wedding night. But Detective Hassan had never forgotten. Even though she had been promoted and assigned to other cases, she continued to think about the evidence that had never quite fit together properly. The crime scene had been too violent for a domestic dispute, but too personal for a professional assassination. The timeline of events had gaps that bothered her, and witness statements contained inconsistencies that she had never been able to resolve. In January, 3 years after the murder, Hassan received a phone call that would change everything. The caller was Inspector Jean-Paul Moreau of the French National Police, Vincent Moreau's nephew and a specialist in international organized crime. "Detective Hassan," Moreau said, "I believe we have information that could be relevant to your Dubai bride case. We have just arrested Marcus Dubois and several of his associates. During questioning, one of them made some interesting statements about a job they performed in Dubai." Hassan felt her heart skip a beat. She had always suspected that Dubois' organization might have been involved in Layla's death, but she had never been able to prove it. The French authorities had been trying to build a case against Dubois for years, but he had always managed to avoid prosecution. "What kind of statements?" Hassan asked. "According to our informant, Dubois sent a team to Dubai to collect a debt from Zara Nakad. The job was supposed to be a simple intimidation, but something went wrong. The team was forced to eliminate the target." Hassan requested all the information the French police had gathered, and within hours she was on a plane to Paris. What she learned there would completely change her understanding of what had happened on Layla's wedding night. The French investigation had uncovered a wealth of evidence about Dubois' criminal organization. Phone records, financial transactions, and witness statements painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that operated across Europe and the Middle East. Most importantly, they had documented communications between Dubois and his associates about the Dubai job. Inspector Moreau showed Hassan transcripts of intercepted phone calls from the days leading up to Layla's wedding. In these calls, Dubois discussed sending a team to Dubai to collect what Zara owed and to make an example of her if she refused to pay. The calls revealed that Dubois had been planning the Dubai operation for months. He had people watching Layla's movements, gathering intelligence about her wedding plans, and preparing for what he called the ultimate collection. But the most shocking revelation came from a recorded conversation between Dubois and his lieutenant, Pierre Rousseau, 2 days after Layla's death. In this conversation, Dubois was furious because the Dubai job had gone completely wrong. "You idiots were supposed to collect the money," Dubois shouted. "Instead, you turned it into a massacre. Now we have police from 3 countries looking for us, and we still do not have our money." Rousseau's response was equally revealing. "The woman fought back harder than we expected. When we broke into the hotel room, she was already fighting with her husband. We tried to control the situation, but it became chaos. We had to eliminate both of them." "Both of them?" Dubois asked. "Well, we eliminated the woman. The husband was supposed to die too, but he survived. We had to make it look like he killed her." Hassan listened to this conversation with growing excitement and horror. The phone call provided evidence that contradicted everything the prosecution had argued during Rashid's trial. Layla had not been killed by her husband during a domestic dispute. She had been murdered by professional criminals who had been sent to collect a debt. The French investigation had also uncovered evidence about how the murder had been carried out. Dubois' team had gained access to the hotel through a service entrance, using uniforms and identification stolen from a catering company. They had waited for the newlyweds to return to their suite, planning to confront Layla about the money she owed. But when they entered the suite, they found Layla and Rashid already in the middle of a heated argument about her criminal past. The criminals had tried to take control of the situation, but Layla had fought back desperately, knowing that her life was in danger. During the struggle, Layla had been fatally wounded. Rashid, trying to protect his wife, had also been attacked, but he had survived. The criminals, realizing that their plan had failed, had decided to frame Rashid for his wife's murder. They had arranged the crime scene to make it look like a domestic violence incident, removing evidence of their presence and making sure that Rashid's fingerprints were on the murder weapon. They had also given Rashid a drug that would affect his memory and make him confused about what had happened. The phone records showed that Dubois' team had remained in Dubai for several days after the murder, monitoring the police investigation to make sure that Rashid was being blamed for the crime. Only when they were satisfied that the frame-up was working had they returned to Europe. Hassan realized that this evidence could completely exonerate Rashid and expose the real killers, but she also knew that getting the evidence admitted in court would be challenging. The French investigation was ongoing, and some of the evidence had been obtained through methods that might not be admissible in a Dubai court. Working with Inspector Moreau and prosecutors in both countries, Hassan developed a strategy to reopen the case. They would need to prove that the French evidence was reliable and that it directly contradicted the original investigation's conclusions. The breakthrough came when French authorities arrested Pierre Rousseau at a border crossing in Spain. Facing the possibility of life in prison for multiple murders, Rousseau agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rousseau provided detailed testimony about the Dubai job, including specifics about how they had gained access to the hotel, what had happened in the suite, and how they had framed Rashid for the murder. His testimony was corroborated by physical evidence, phone records, and the recorded conversations between Dubois and his associates. Most importantly, Rousseau revealed that they had given Rashid a powerful sedative that would have affected his memory and cognitive function. This explained why Rashid's account of the evening had been so confused and contradictory, and why he had been unable to remember crucial details about the struggle. The sedative also explained why Rashid had been found in a catatonic state when police arrived at the scene. He had not been in shock from killing his wife, he had been drugged by the real killers. In March, exactly 3 years after Layla's death, Hassan presented her new evidence to the Dubai prosecutor's office. The evidence was compelling and comprehensive, showing that Rashid had been wrongly convicted and that the real killers were members of Dubois' criminal organization. The prosecutor agreed to reopen the case, and within weeks, Rashid's conviction was overturned. He was released from prison after serving 3 years for a crime he had not committed. The real killers were extradited to Dubai to face charges for Layla's murder. The discovery of the truth about Layla's death sent shockwaves through Dubai's legal system and the international media. The case became a symbol of the dangers of rushing to judgment and the importance of thorough investigation. For Detective Hassan, the resolution of the case was both satisfying and heartbreaking. She had proven that justice could eventually prevail, but she also knew that Rashid had lost 3 years of his life and would never fully recover from the trauma of being wrongly convicted of murdering his wife. The case also highlighted the far-reaching consequences of criminal activity. Layla's decision to become involved with organized crime had ultimately led to her death and the destruction of multiple lives. Her attempt to escape her past had failed, and the violence she had tried to leave behind had followed her to Dubai with devastating consequences. As Hassan reflected on the case, she realized that it contained important lessons about the nature of justice, the power of truth, and the complex ways that our past decisions can shape our future. The beautiful bride who had died on her wedding night had finally received the justice she deserved, even if it had taken 3 years to achieve. The revelation that Rashid had been wrongly convicted sent shockwaves through Dubai's legal system and beyond. Within days of the new evidence being presented, the courts moved quickly to correct the injustice. Rashid was released from prison on a Wednesday morning in March, 3 years and 2 days after his wife's murder. The scene outside the courthouse was chaotic. Media from around the world had gathered to cover what many were calling one of the most significant wrongful conviction cases in Middle Eastern legal history. Rashid emerged from the courthouse, flanked by his lawyers and family members, looking thin and aged beyond his years. His first words to the media were not about his own suffering, but about his wife. Layla was a victim twice, first of the criminals who killed her, and then of a system that failed to find her real killers. I am free now, but she is still gone, and nothing can bring her back. The Al-Fahad family, devastated by 3 years of scandal and public shame, now faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives and reputation. Rashid's mother, Fatima, spoke to reporters about the family's ordeal. "We never stopped believing in Rashid's innocence, but we also never stopped grieving for Layla. She was part of our family, and we loved her despite the circumstances of her past." Meanwhile, the real killers were facing justice. Pierre Rousseau and 2 other members of Dubois' organization were extradited to Dubai to face charges for Layla's murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming, thanks to Rousseau's cooperation and the wealth of information gathered by French authorities. Marcus Dubois himself remained in French custody, facing charges for organizing the murder and running a criminal enterprise. The French prosecutor handling his case, Magistrate Claire Dubois, no relation, described him as one of the most dangerous criminals we have ever encountered, responsible for millions in theft and multiple murders over more than a decade. The trial of Layla's real killers began 6 months after Rashid's release. The proceedings were closely watched by international media and legal experts, who saw the case as a test of how well different legal systems could cooperate in complex international crimes. The evidence presented during the trial painted a detailed picture of how the murder had been planned and executed. Phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimony showed that Dubois had been planning to eliminate Layla for months before her wedding. The prosecution argued that Layla's marriage to Rashid had actually accelerated her death because it made her more visible and gave Dubois' organization a clear target. The lavish wedding, covered extensively in social media and society magazines, had essentially announced to the world where Layla could be found. Pierre Rousseau's testimony was particularly damaging to his former associates. He described in detail how they had gained access to the hotel, how they had planned to intimidate Layla into paying the debt, and how the situation had escalated into violence when she refused to cooperate. "She told us she would never pay," Rousseau testified. "She said she would rather die than give us the money. We thought she was bluffing, but she fought us with everything she had. She knew that paying would not save her, it would only delay the inevitable." The trial also revealed the extent to which Layla had been living in fear during her final months. Evidence showed that she had been receiving threatening communications for weeks before her wedding, and that she had been making preparations to flee Dubai if necessary. Her safety deposit box, discovered years after her death, contained not only cash and false documents, but also a detailed plan for disappearing again. She had researched new identities, safe houses, and escape routes, showing that she had been preparing for the possibility that her past would catch up with her. The most heartbreaking evidence came from Layla's personal diary, also found in the safety deposit box. In her final entries, written just days before her wedding, she expressed her love for Rashid and her desperate hope that marriage would somehow protect her from her criminal past. "I know I do not deserve happiness," she had written, "but Rashid makes me believe that people can change, that the past does not have to define the future. If I can just make it through the wedding, maybe we can build a life together based on truth instead of lies." The diary entries also revealed that Layla had been planning to tell Rashid the complete truth about her past after their honeymoon. She had been preparing for the conversation for weeks, hoping that their love would be strong enough to survive the revelation of her criminal history. The trial lasted 4 months and resulted in convictions for all 3 defendants. Pierre Rousseau received a life sentence for murder, while his 2 associates received sentences of 25 years each for their roles in the crime. Marcus Dubois, tried separately in France, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The resolution of the case brought some measure of justice for Layla, but it also highlighted the tragic consequences of the choices she had made earlier in her life. Her attempt to escape her criminal past had ultimately failed, and the violence she had tried to leave behind had followed her to Dubai with devastating results. For Rashid, the end of the legal proceedings marked the beginning of a long process of healing and rebuilding. The 3 years he had spent in prison had taken a tremendous toll on his physical and mental health. He had lost weight, developed anxiety and depression, and struggled with the trauma of losing his wife and being wrongly convicted of her murder. The Al Fahad family established a foundation in Layla's memory, focused on helping victims of organized crime and supporting legal reforms to prevent wrongful convictions. Rashid became an advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking at conferences and working with legal organizations to improve the investigation and prosecution of complex international crimes. "My wife's death taught me that justice is not automatic," he said during one of his first public speeches after his release. "It requires constant vigilance, thorough investigation, and the courage to admit when we have made mistakes. The system failed both Layla and me, but we have learned from those failures and can do better in the future." The case also had broader implications for how law enforcement agencies handle international organized crime. The cooperation between Dubai police, French authorities, and Interpol became a model for future investigations involving criminal organizations that operate across national borders. Detective Hassan, who had never given up on finding the truth, was promoted to chief inspector and put in charge of a new unit specializing in international criminal investigations. Her persistence and dedication had not only solved one of Dubai's most notorious cases, but had also prevented a wrongful conviction from becoming permanent. The media coverage of the case's resolution was extensive, but it focused as much on the lessons learned as on the dramatic details of the crime. Legal experts, criminologists, and social commentators used the case to discuss broader issues about identity, deception, and the consequences of our past actions. The most important lesson that emerged from the tragedy was about the power of truth and the danger of living a life based on deception. Layla's attempt to reinvent herself had been understandable, given the circumstances of her past, but it had ultimately led to her death and the destruction of multiple lives. Her story became a cautionary tale about the importance of honesty in relationships. and the impossibility of truly escaping one's past. While people can change and deserve second chances, the case showed that change must be based on truth and accountability, not on lies and deception. The case also highlighted the importance of not rushing to judgment in complex criminal investigations. The initial investigation had focused too narrowly on the obvious suspect and had failed to consider alternative explanations for the evidence. The wrongful conviction of Rashid had been a direct result of this tunnel vision. For viewers of true crime content, the case offers several important lessons. First, it demonstrates that the truth in criminal cases can be much more complex than it initially appears. Second, it shows how organized crime can reach across borders and destroy lives years after the initial criminal activity. Third, it illustrates the importance of thorough investigation and the willingness to reconsider conclusions when new evidence emerges. The tragedy of Layla and Rashid also serves as a reminder that our past actions have consequences that can extend far into the future. Layla's involvement with organized crime, even years before her marriage, ultimately led to her death and the destruction of the life she had tried to build in Dubai. Finally, the case demonstrates that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail when dedicated professionals refuse to give up on finding the truth. Detective Hassan's persistence and the cooperation of international law enforcement agencies showed that even the most complex cases can be solved when people are willing to work together and follow the evidence wherever it leads. The story of the Dubai bride who died on her wedding night has become more than just a true crime case. It has become a symbol of the complex ways that our past can shape our future and the importance of building our lives on foundations of truth rather than deception. If you found this case as fascinating and heartbreaking as I did, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons did you take away from Layla and Rashid's tragedy? And if you want to see more deep dives into cases that change the way we think about justice and truth, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the next case I have lined up will challenge everything you think you know about family secrets and the lengths people will go to protect them.